So let's talk a little bit about moment lenses. Now I do want to mention these lenses because, as I talked about before in a previous section, that some of the older phones don't have some of the new lenses that are out in some of the newer phones. So if you have a really old phone, maybe you don't have an ultra wide lens in it, maybe you don't have telephoto, maybe you have the iPhone 14 Plus and you don't have the telephoto lens at all. Utilizing the moment lenses gives you those focal lengths without necessarily having that feature built into your phone. Now, if you're somebody that does have an iPhone 14 Pro, for example, you're like, I have a telephoto lens built in and I have an ultra wide lens. These lenses are still pretty helpful because we sell a fisheye lens that gives you a very unique look that you can't get in camera. And we also sell an anamorphic lens, and you can't get that right in your phone as well. So those kind of give you two stylized looks. But I do want to walk through each one of the lenses and talk about them a little bit more to help give you an idea of what lens would be the best to use for different types of projects that you're working on. All right, so up first, we talked about this in the phone and case section, but you're gonna need to make sure that you have a mounting system installed for your phone. If you have a phone in the recent couple years, we have this swappable mount system here. This is the iPhone 14 Pro. I talked about the mounting system here. This is the little trim mount installed that allows me to mount lenses. If you're shooting on Android, check our website to see if your case is supported. So that is the mounting system here. You'll see the mounts over the top of the telephoto and the standard lens. You can use it on either. However, I do recommend, for the most part, always mounting on the standard lens. So let's jump into the first one here. This is the 58mm telephoto lens. This one's great if you're shooting on an older phone or if you actually don't have the Pro model, if you just have a Plus model. So on the iPhone 14 Pro here, the telephoto lens is on the top and the bottom is the standard lens. I'm gonna screw it on right now and toss it into this mount. Boom. I can use this for photos or for video. It's a really nice high quality lens that's got some weight to it. It's made really well. This is gonna give you about a 58mm focal length. The focal length on the standard lens of the iPhone is roughly about 24mm. In previous years, it's been 26, 28. So it's somewhere around there. So adding this onto your lens is gonna give you about 58mm or so. So you can tell you are gonna get a nice punch in, really good for portraits, really good for just zooming in and getting more detailed shots. The next lens we've got here is the fisheye lens. If you're looking to create a really immersive scene, if you really want to be right in the action, a lot of cinematographers will use ultra wide lenses to really make you feel like you're there and you're a part of something. The other thing too is that the look of this is honestly pretty similar to a GoPro. So if you're trying to get some cool action shots or something really close up, or if you're in a car where there's like a lot of tight space and you're trying to get a certain angle for your film, definitely check out this lens because it's gonna allow you to put a ton in the frame. I think for doing short form content, it could be really fun. I think when people see the footage right away, they're gonna ask you, how did you get shots that looked like that? Definitely a really fun lens and something that you really can't get out of the phone otherwise. All right, so up next we have the macro lens. They did add macro capabilities to the recent iPhone 14. However, a lot of phones still don't have macro capabilities. This allows you to get really up close. If you're shooting something like flowers, if you're shooting insects, eyes, anything up close and you want these nice texture and detailed shots, Taylor actually made a film a few years ago using one of these. She was up close in books and some other images and things and made the coolest little short film ever just using this lens. This lens isn't for everybody. Obviously, it has a specific use case. However, it does create some really interesting, tight close-up shots that you can add to your film to kind of help elevate things and change up your focal lengths quite a bit. All right, so up next we have the Moment Wide. This is the very first lens that we actually made. It is what we started our Kickstarter with way back in the day. It's what blew us up. The Moment Wide lens is great because it adapts onto your main lens, which, as I said before, is the highest quality lens, and it allows you to get that wider focal length of around 18mm. If you're somebody that shoots a lot in lower light scenarios, definitely check out the Moment Wide lens because it's gonna allow you to get the sharpest, highest resolution quality possible in those scenarios, and it probably won't be as noisy as using the ultra wide lens. All right, so this is probably my favorite lens that we sell. This is the anamorphic lens. To get the anamorphic look out of like a big mirrorless camera would require thousands of dollars of lenses. And it's pretty incredible what we've squeezed into a tiny little lens that screws onto your phone. That's a lot more affordable. At this point, if you're like, okay, cool, but what the heck is anamorphic? So if you've ever gone to a movie and you notice how wide the screen is, it might be a little bit shorter, but it's a lot wider as you're viewing it. You'll also see it on YouTube videos sometimes where people have these black bars on the top and bottom of the frame, and it makes the image look a little bit more cinematic. That's basically, in some cases, faking the anamorphic look. So when you put this adapter on, it's actually gonna make the focal length of whatever you're shooting at a little bit wider, but it's also gonna squeeze your frame a little bit. So the anamorphic lens will not only make the focal length a little bit wider, it also squeezes the image a little bit, but it's also going to give you this really interesting bokeh. And then the most evident thing that you'll notice is what are called flares. And that's basically those blue streaks that you see across the screen when there's like flashlights in the shot or headlights. You'll notice it in a bunch of action films. And honestly, now that I've mentioned it to you, you'll probably notice it in a ton of your favorite TV shows and movies. But those flares that go across the screen, they're basically like these long stretched out light beams. That look is all coming from an anamorphic lens. Now at the moment we sell one that makes a blue flare, and we also sell one that makes a gold flare. So it's a different stylized look depending on what you're going for. But like I said, it's really cool that you can shoot that just in your phone, because to be able to do that on a bigger camera is pretty expensive, and this is one of the quickest run and gun ways I've seen to do it. So I do want to mention that if you are shooting on anamorphic, one thing you'll notice right away, and this is the same if you're shooting on a mirrorless camera or if you're shooting it on your phone, the image looks squished and stretched out a little bit, and it looks pretty strange on the back of your phone. In post, you're going to have to do what's called de-squeezing. So if you go into any of your editing programs, and we'll talk about this later in the course, I'm going to show you how to do this, but if you go into the editing programs, you essentially tell it, hey, this is an anamorphic shot, and it's going to fix that squeeze for you. This is actually also one reason that's great, and we'll talk about this in the app section, about using the Moment Pro Camera app, because you can actually tell it that you're using the anamorphic, and you can record those anamorphic frames right into camera. You don't have to worry about de-squeezing anything in post or bringing it over to your computer. You can actually edit anamorphic footage right on your phone if you record in the Moment Pro Camera app and say, hey, I'm using the 1.3x anamorphic, or hey, I'm using the 1.5x anamorphic. And on that topic, just mentioning 1.3 and 1.5, they're just different squeeze ratios, and they give you different looks. So experiment with both of them. If you want a subtle look and you don't want it to be too overly stylized, then maybe 1.33x is better for you. If you do want it to be very stylized and you want the frame to be a little bit shorter and maybe a little bit wider and really look cinematic, then maybe the 1.5x is right for you. We've talked a little bit about moment lenses. So with all that said, let's jump into the next section and talk about filters.